Keep it. They shouldn't do it.
Keep it?
Some people don't understand what we're doing.
Yeah, obviously. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulihi nabi al-Kareem wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidun Majid. Allahumma barik ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على طاعتك يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك اللهم ثبتنا عند الموت بلا إله إلا الله آمين يا رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. This is what, our third session, fourth session, something like that. I think our third session, and it's our first live session, alhamdulillah. So it's good to be back here in the Princeton area where, alhamdulillah, I remember coming here with Sajid Bhai I don't know, like 2015 or something, when this place was still under construction. I remember when none of this existed, it was all still cornfields, and now you all have a very nice, flourishing community, alhamdulillah. So we've been talking about some of the work of Allama Iqbal. We've been speaking about a lot of his thought, mainly what he stood for. And the main thing that I am probably trying to bring is not the fact that we all know Allama Iqbal was great. You know, everyone hears his poetry and they're enchanted by it. But what way does his work reflect within us is one subject. And how does the output of that reflect other people, right? How many of you have children, right? All of you, raise your hand. How many of you have children? Okay, so just about every one of you. How often do you try to have a discussion with your kid about Allama Iqbal's thought? And they're like, I don't know what you're saying, Imam, right? I don't know what it is, what you're talking about. Because the way you internalize something is very different than the way you externalize something, right? Similarly, what we always talk about things getting lost in translation, right? So it may make sense over here, but how do I actually output that idea to other people? This morning, we were talking about how within our communities, especially within South Asian communities, the only likeness when people talk about, oh, my culture, is that you like watered down, non-spicy curry, right? You like your chai tea latte, and you're into like dancing at weddings and wearing nice clothing. Like that ends up becoming the premise of our kids' desiness, right? Or their ability to want to connect with their culture. But the truth of it is that it's a disservice to hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of years of scholarship, which began not just there, but began in Turkey, that began in the Arab world, that began in Persia, and eventually made its way over. And I think that's the issue that we've had, is translating what someone is feeling into words. And sometimes when you try to translate your feelings into words, what ends up happening? Sometimes the meanings are lost, right? That's why, for example, the Quran, when we translate the Quran, we don't often say that that is an actual copy of the Quran, but we say it's a copy of a translation of the Quran, because the meanings itself are just meanings, right? And when you try to explain this to someone, they often don't understand this. But if I were to tell you, I read this awesome translation, it's actually funny. I feel like in the Muslim community, especially amongst the South Asian Muslim community, they're more offended at a badly translated, line of Allama Iqbal's poetry than they are of a bad Quran translation, right? And it's just the truth of it. Like, you can see people get worked up very easily about it. But why is that? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about roughly today. We're not actually going to be going in depth into the poetry, because I think there's a lot of background information that we have to discuss. There's a lot of unpacking we have to do of our own biases when it comes to actually talking about Allama Iqbal's shikwa, right? And we know that he wrote shikwa, which in Arabic and in Urdu means a complaint, right? And who was he complaining against in that poem? Allah, right? He was complaining against God at the end of the day. And to set the backdrop of it, people often quote shikwa and then the response to it, which is what? Jawab shikwa, which is literally the response to the complaint. Which is what? Shikwa is a discussion of the human complaint to God, to Allah, saying that Allah, why have you abandoned us? Why have you caused us to go through all these tough times? Why have you caused us to be losers? And originally, when Allama Iqbal actually had said this poem, it was at a small gathering. People wanted him to sing it in a melodious manner, but he actually decided against it, right? Because he was like, you guys need to hear what I'm trying to tell you. I have to be able to convey these words of what I want to bring about. And when someone does that, and what I also try to do is try to tie this into, issues related to our families, issues related to our communities, because I think that's the main point. If you're just philosophizing about these ideas, you're not really gaining anything from them, then what's the purpose of it, right? You're dishonoring the memory of the writer, of the poet, you're dishonoring the poem, and you're dishonoring what the author intended with the poem, right? It goes the same way with the Quran. Often people will recite the Quran or remember the Quran, but do we actually act according to it, right? Do we do amal of it? Do we act upon it? Do we understand what we're supposed to do with it? We're supposed to utilize it and become better people and make better communities. But what was shikwa? Shikwa, in essence, was Allama Iqbal, at least in the verbs, or at least in the nouns and the words that he used, it seemed like that he was complaining to Allah, and it seemed blasphemous, right? How could someone dare say anything against God? And I want you to think about this today. Often issues in the Muslim community that stem from someone saying that I don't believe in God, or I don't believe in Islam, or I don't know what this stuff is, we often become very hung up on that child's complaint or that young person's complaint, as opposed to seeing what is the emotion causing that person to say what they are saying, right? What is the reason this person is saying what they are saying? And, Sheikh Mendes will even tell you, and people will tell you who work in the community, more often than not, the job of a good teacher, of a good counselor, is to look past the words, look past the actions, and look at what is causing this person to feel the pain they are feeling, right? What is causing this person to say what they are saying? And originally, this poem was uttered roughly 111 years ago in 1909, right? And Allama Iqbal, he goes into speaking about the conditions, right, of the Muslims. And he goes into speaking about how the Muslims are like downtrodden, right? Like, why should I choose to be the loser in this game, right? And that's kind of how he begins it, right? How does he begin it? How does Shikwa begin? Why am I going to be a loser? Right? Why should I be a loser? Like, what's there to gain from this being a loser? And he's already starting it off, right? We are a losing, like, think about this, right? He's saying we're a losing nation. Why are we in this state? Why are we going to continue to be in this state, right? And people were listening, and then, he talks about, the bulbul, nale bulbul, right? Which is like, when you hear the nightingale, going off, like, do you just turn away? Do you just go away from it? No, what's important is to recognize and understand what someone is trying to convey. When you hear a child or a baby crying, do you get angry at the baby for crying? Like, how dare this baby cry, right? If you feel angry at that, maybe you gotta not be a parent at that moment, right? But that's the thing, it's beckoning from pain. And unfortunately, when we become adults, we forget that there is still pain inside of us. We forget there is the pain of maybe an unfulfilled emotion from our childhood, a lost parent, a lost child, something within us that does not allow us or our communities to be whole human beings. But what we ought to be doing is working on being whole human beings. And with Shikwa, it's just really interesting because, when I read this, when I go through it, and as somebody who's, a pastoral care worker in the community, I see the entire community in this, because we often hear shikwa, right? And very seldom do we hear jawab shikwa, which is, we often hear the complaint. And we become so hung up on the complaint, For those of you that are like physicians, it's one thing to be a pathologist and recognize the disease. It's another thing to then focus on the cure, right? And if you become so hung up on the disease or the ailment or the symptom, you're like, this is so bad. Oh my God, this is horrendous. What's that going to do to the patient, right? You're not giving them medicine. You're not giving them any support. Of course, it's going to fester and make things worse inside of them, right? That's the point that's being brought up here. Now, my point being, for those of you that don't know, again, the main line that will come up here, right? He'll say, Shikwa Allah se khakam, badane mujhko. Like he's saying that I have something to tell God. I have a complaint against God, right? I have a complaint against God. That's the main thing that he's saying. And in another portion, he'll say something to the extent of, right? And I'm actually gonna, so for those of you, I'm gonna use more English than Urdu, inshallah. So if you feel the need, you just go ahead, and if you understand the line that I'm saying, just go ahead and blurt out the Urdu. But basically, to Allah, you're used to hearing all this tasbih, but now let's hear some complaints, which is the line.
थोड़ा सा गिला भी सुन ले
थोड़ा सा गिला भी सुन ले. Yes.
शिकवा अल्लाह से खाकम बदहन.
Badhan, yes.
बदहन.
Baddahan.
दहन.
Yeah.
Mouth.
Yeah.
Ba mean by. मेरे मुंह में मिट्टी.
Yeah, fill my mouth with dust. Yeah.
Dust be in my mouth.
Yeah.
In other words, he's already apologized.
Yeah, yeah.
He's already said
Yeah.
I shouldn't be saying what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I do have a complaint.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the important part. खाकम
Yeah.
बदहन.
Exactly.
So that basically was his apology.
Which also, if you think about it, it's a sense of humbleness too. What he knows what he's about to say, he's going to get flack for.
Exactly.
He knew what he was getting himself into. He knew what he signed up for, right? We all know what we signed up for, and he goes in. I think that's the better thing. He knew what he signed up for,
Exactly.
right? And he knew that he was going to get flack for this. He knew that he was going to talk about how the community, how the Muslims are in such difficulty and pain. But what's interesting is that when people talk about shikwa, jawab shikwa, people think he just said jawab shikwa right after, but he didn't. 4 years lapsed, 3 or 4 years lapsed until people basically came around. They're like, oh, wow, that's amazing. Now, last week and the last 2 weeks, we did the Tawheed poem, right, from Zarb Kalim. And one of the things that he said was that this is something, he spoke about the idea of Tawheed and how people take Tawheed, and he said, فَقَدْ mas'ala ilmaka, that basically they've reduced it to just dialectics, right? And he's talking about this 100 years ago. They've reduced it to Ash'ari, they've reduced it to Athari and Maturidi and Ilmul Kalam, right? That's literally uses the term Ilmul Kalam, right? But he says that this was once upon a time a transformative science, but people are carrying around scabbards that are free of the sword of Qul Huwallah, right? That's what he said. The people are carrying around shells. And that's what we end up finding our communities in, right? In shells at the end of the day. So if we're acting as shells, he's actually complaining to Allah as well about the fact that we're just living as shells. Or he thinks on one end, and again, we also spoke about this, about reading Iqbal holistically. People misread Iqbal because they'll only read one portion of it. And we've mentioned this, that people can misread text very easily. You can easily read into a text what's not there. And you know what's interesting? The Quran speaks about this in the beginning. In the beginning of the Quran, Allah says there's 3 types of people, right? ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, those who take guidance from the Quran, they have taqwa. And who are those that have taqwa? الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ, they believe in that which they don't see or understand right away. The second group of people, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا سَوَاءٌ عَلَيْهِمْ أَنذَرْتَهُم, whether you invite them to Islam or you don't, they're already set in their own ways. They've disbelieved. And the third group of people are the people who are hypocrites, right? Who may utilize what they have for their own purposes. Now, who is a hypocrite in the sight of God? We don't know, right? That's for Allah to decide. We don't know. But one aspect that you can see of hypocrites is that they will utilize whatever is in front of them for their own gain. Now, are we doing that explicitly? No. But when you see someone say, Allama Iqbal, oh, he was someone that was a secularist, or he was someone that was a religionist or something like that, right? Because he'll write about how right? That the jurist or the scholar or the mullah, these guys don't know what Islam is. But again, it's in a context. But in a similar situation, he'll say that you're still colonized by the same people because of the fact you decided not to wake up, in other lines of poetry, right? So who is he talking to? He's talking to everyone, right? When you're with your family, you talk one way. When you're with your friends, you speak another way. When you're with your children, you speak another way. When you're with your spouse, you speak another way. So it's important for us to understand that in the context of literature. So we'll see in Shikwa.
The context was
yes.
Nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
कौम क्या चीज है, कौमों की इमामत क्या है?
Yeah.
इस राज से वाकिफ है, न मुल्ला न फकीह.
Right.
So it was nationalism that was the discussion going on when he said that.
Yeah. So now we're going to see his thing, like, what is wrong with the Muslims today, right? But then 4 years pass, and then you'll see that he makes a metaphor of God responding to the people, right? So, oh, you have a problem with me? Have you looked at them? Have you looked at yourselves? Have you looked in the mirror? And then we'll get into it. You know, दिल से जो बात निकलती है असर रखती है पर नहीं ताकत परवाज़ मगर रखती है, right? खाक से उठती है, which yeah, which basically means that the second one, the response, it'll start with the idea of responding, right? And it's basically God responding to the people by saying that, of course, whatever comes out of your heart, it has the power of flight without any wings, right? Right? Yeah.
But this part is Iqbal saying.
Yeah, he's talking, yeah.
First
yeah.
response of the Jawab-e
yeah.
also is Iqbal saying.
Yeah.
Then divine speaking starts
yeah.
with the fourth.
Right.
First he describes what happened to
yeah.
what I said.
Yeah.
Dil se jo baat nikalti hai. That
yeah.
he's talking about.
Yeah.
Then the stars respond as to who is this talking?
Yeah.
Then it goes higher up, and then they say, well, it has to be somebody who has been to this place before. Yep. It must be somebody who knows Bahish, and that was the Adam thrown out of the paradise.
Yeah. So
it must be a child of Adam.
Yeah.
And then the divine stuff.
Yeah. So it's just really interesting that we're going to see the tones change. And actually, for those 3 or 4 years, like scholars were giving like fatwas against Allama Iqbal, saying he's not someone you should listen to. He's someone that disrespected God, right? For those few years. But then you'll see with the Jawab-e Shikwa that it's God responding to the Muslims saying, take a damn good look in the mirror. That's what he's saying. Take a look in the mirror. And you'll hear, right? He's saying that you give the adhan, right? You love giving the adhan and you got all the words right, but you lack the spirit of Bilal, right? And then he gets into the second part and he says, you love studying philosophy, but you've forgotten the understanding of Ghazali, meaning what? You study all these things, but these things have an essence to them, which you are consistently missing. They have an essence to them, which you are constantly overlooking, right? That you're constantly overlooking. In Shikwa, right? The Jurat Amos, right?
Jurat Amos meri tabe.
Yeah. Yeah. He's saying, I have the like the gift to sing, which gives me the courage to complain. Yes. My gift of singing gives me the courage to complain. So he's talking about.
You made me Allamahul Bayan.
Mm-hmm.
You have given me the ability to talk.
Yes.
Now that is asking me to speak.
Right, and that goes back to Surah Ar-Rahman, right? Ar-Rahman, allama al-Quran, khalaqa al-insan, allamahul bayan. Allah has taught us the art of not just speech, but expression, right? He's taught us the art of expression. So Allama Iqbal is expressing himself in the way that he knows best. It's rhetoric, it's metaphors, it's logic, you know? And this is a lost science in the community. People often were like, okay, the Quran says this, so it's just a bunch of facts. I'm going to do number 1, not do number 2, do number 3. But that's not the point, right? When you study language, we've lost the art of the study of language, and education has become nothing more than a means to a paycheck in our communities, right? Education has become nothing more than a means to an end. Now, when that happens, will people care for intricacy? Will people care for metaphors? Will people care to understand underlying meanings? No, they won't. They won't care for that because there's only one thing that matters. We become a very one-dimensional, one-layered people. And when we force people to become one-layered and we force people to become one-dimensional, when we force people into a box, and this is the only way you can express yourself, when we force our kids to do that, what ends up happening? It combusts. It combusts. That's what the point. So what does the speaker intend with their speech, right? That's the point. What does the speaker intend with their speech? What is the power of metaphor? And when people read this, think about this, right? Oh, we take it for what it is, right? We don't want to interpret wordings. We don't want to understand what the niyyah of the speaker was, what the intention of the speaker was. So then you have 3-4 years of people saying, oh, this guy is an innovator. He doesn't respect God. He doesn't respect people. But then when he responds to Jawab al-Shikwa, then people are like, oh, right? It's literally what it was. When he's saying that this is a form of expression, then people began to understand. Then people began to relate. Then people began to study. And even then, no one is perfect. No community is perfect. But with understanding the shikwa, people need to really understand the context of where it was being said, where it was being written, to whom it was being said to, why it was being said. Because at a time and place where people were just like, though we're not Catholics, right? But there is a sense of like keeping people away from text to understand it themselves, to comprehend it. So we're in this constant cycle of getting people to do what? We're looking for answers to questions we don't even know. So that's why we're agitated. That's why we're anxious. And that's where like, oh, Quran says this, Hadith says that. Oh, and this person said that. But if you're divorced from the sources of your being, you're divorced from the sources of your intellectual tradition, and you're just looking to cut corners and come to an answer without knowing the question, you may be benefiting just yourself in that moment at the expense of benefiting your family and your community and your mind for years to come. And that's what he's going to do. He'll eventually begin to go into all these different aspects of the community, of them becoming voiceless, of them becoming trampled, of them being colonized, of them being just seen in a very difficult manner, right? And he wanted people to do that. He wanted them to be shocked. He wanted them to be shocked. And sometimes communities need a good shock, right? A very good shock to get them up, to wake them up, to get them out of their slumber. And that's the point. That's what he's going to go into. That's what he's going to talk about. And he'll say that, what was it? What was it? Tito Majud Azal Sahi, right? Yes. Yes. Like you've always been there, right?
It's a beautiful one. Just translate that.
Yes.
Just read that again.
थी तो मौजूद अज़ल से ही तेरी ज़ात क़दीम, फूल था ज़ेब चमन पर न परेशान थी शमीम, शर्त इंसाफ है ए साहिब अल्ताफ़ अमीन, बुए गुल फैलती किस तरह जो होती न नसीम.
Translate that.
जमीयत खातिर ये परेशानी थी. You can't. वरना उम्मत तेरे महबूब.
Okay, don't translate it, explain it.
I'll explain it. You were there. Can I?
No, please.
You were there, but your message could not get anywhere.
Yeah.
Just see, even if there is a flower and it has a beautiful fragrance, without the air, that fragrance cannot spread.
Right.
We spread out so that we could spread your message. That's why we went around spreading your message. Our spreading out to the world and taking your message basically was for that purpose for you.
Yeah.
So we did all of that for you. So again, you would have been really not known.
Yeah.
You would have stayed as a hidden treasure unless we did the breeze that takes the fragrance away. Simple translation.
Imagine how people reacted to that. Say, God, we did your bidding. What did you do for us?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
It takes it one further, right?
Yeah.
So the way that, and one of the scholars said that the tradition of shikwa is purely Islamic.
Yeah.
The prophets did this, right? When they had, but when he complains, there is no complaint like him. Ummate aur bhi hain, inme gunahgar bhi hain, ajz wale bhi hain, ijz wale bhi hain, mast mein pandar bhi hain. Inme kahil bhi hain, ghafil bhi hain, होशियार भी हैं, सैकड़ों हैं कि तेरे नाम से बेजार भी हैं, रहमतें हैं तेरी अग़यार के कारखानों पर, बर्फ गिरती है तो बेचारे मुसलमानों पर.
Yeah.
So he was
very requisite for all this is the total immersion in anything.
Right.
I know a Hafiz who is no longer, he died at the age of 30.
Yeah.
He said, Uncle, when you read Quran too much, the ayat started talking to you. This is what we mean.
Yeah.
That is immersion.
Yeah.
Anything, Iqbal or Rumi or anything we talk, it is a total immersion in something when you can gain something.
So basically, the verses or stanzas, you don't read them; they begin to read you.
Yes.
That's the point, right? That you become so engulfed in it that it begins to read you, and that's what it is. At the end of the day, there's even a hadith of the Prophet. He said, "Al-Muslimu mir'atul Muslim," that the believer is a mirror of the other believer. And more often than not, people will talk about it in the context of like, you know, if you think good of a person, that means there's good in you. If you think bad of a person, that means there's probably bad in you. But take that and scale it for a whole nation, right? How we see ourselves is a reflection of how we will see other nations, right? How we see other people. And we'll see here that that's, you know, like what we said, that, you know, we did God's bidding. So God, what are we supposed to be giving? You didn't do anything for us, right? And, you know, it's really interesting when you study logic and argumentation with flaws, for example. You know, people always look for flaws in arguments, like it's always spoken about. But there's two types of flaws at the end of the day. And like, you know, lawyers will talk about this as well. Like you can take any premise and conclusion and either strengthen it, weaken it, whatever you want based on your own bias, based on your own perspective, right? You can do that all day and all night. For example, take something similar, religion. You know, as Muslims, we have certain beliefs. Christians have other beliefs. Hindus have other beliefs, right? And we all have our premises and our conclusions that we think are right or wrong, and we believe in that, we follow that. But take something else. Take another flaw. Either something is inherently flawed, it really is flawed. Like if this window is broken, everyone knows it's a flawed window. Yeah, it has to be fixed. But it would be a different thing to say, you know, I think this door should be red. This is not a right color, right? This is not a right color, and I can create a reason for it. I think this door should be red because Sajid Bhai's shirt is red. And I think whatever color Sajid Bhai wears, the door has to match it, right? And because, you know, Zach's shirt is red, and because my kurta is red. We did not plan that, by the way. Yeah, I don't know how that happened, but I made a joke before. I said, "Hum log sab lal pehne hain to qalandar kaun hai?" I said that we're all wearing red, then who's the qalandar? Basically, it's a term that's associated with like a Sufi saint. But, you know, so flaws are, so there's the inherent flaw, and then there's what you think is flawed, right? So people see Allama Iqbal's Shikwa and think it's a completely flawed piece of work, especially if they don't read Jawab-e-Shikwa, and they're very much so focused on just theological imperative. Oh, it has to be theologically sound, right? In its wording and whatnot. So we're going to be very literal and very strict and very restrictive. And that leads to what? That leads to suffocation. Just get your foot off my throat. That's all that it comes down to, right? But if you have your foot on someone's throat and you're forcing them to say whatever you want, of course they're going to say whatever you want because you're the one that's forcing the text to speak to you like that. But if you're not letting it be open, you're not letting yourself be vulnerable. You're not letting yourself say, yeah, this makes sense. I feel this. And why does that matter? Why does that matter? Because today, the young Muslim that is living in this country has a foot on their throat, right? I don't know about Allah, you know, I don't know about this Islam thing. I don't know about religion, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And what do we end up doing? Don't say that or else you're going to hell, right? Don't say that or else you're going to hell. But that's what shikwa is. Allow people to have some shikwa in their life. Allow them to express it, right? Because it's not, you know, here's the thing. Again, this goes back to education, how we come towards education, how we understand. When we get educated, we think that's the end. I did my 4-year degree, that's it. But shikwa is not the end. Shikwa is the beginning. Shikwa is the start of a conversation. It's not the end of a conversation. If I were to say this was a start of something, people would not have come to very, you know, lucid conclusions about the text, even though he releases Jawab-e-Shikwa 3 years later, clarifying it and stating it and whatnot. And some people even say, it's like, I wrote Jawab-e-Shikwa because people wouldn't leave me alone, right? But Shikwa itself, for the you know, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ, right? إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَعِبْرَةً لِأُولِي الْأَبْصَارِ. For those people who possess intellect, who possess mind, who possess vigor in their ability to think, would understand what's in front of them. But getting to that point of having intellect, getting to that point of training your mind is a whole different discussion. So that's what I didn't want to get into it today because I felt that there's a lot that can be said about each one of these lines, but I felt it's really important to set a groundwork as we go into this because this is going to be long. The other poem we did on Tawheed was like maybe 8 lines or something like that. So we got through it in 2 weeks. I mean, even though we got through 8 lines in 2 weeks. So that's a lot. So inshallah, you know, I want to hear what you all have to say. I know there's some of you are Urdu scholars here. I'd love to hear your commentary. You know, the hope that I have with providing my perspective For those of you that don't know, I'm born and raised here. I went to Montclair State University, did a degree in psychology, and then I actually moved to Lucknow, and I lived in Lucknow for 3 years. I went to Darul Nadwat al-Ulama. So I didn't see you, Simi, so I go. So it's actually funny. I met Sajid and Simi in Lucknow. Yeah.
Go back there.
Yes. But I came back here, then I did my master's at the Hartford Seminary. And I'm very much so passionate about just seeing how issues of ethnicity, nationality, and religion intersect, right? And I think it's important that we understand that, because a lot of kids struggle in this country too. And my purpose in being here is that if you want to hear someone talk about Iqbal, you want to hear someone talk about Shikwa, I'm sure there's many of you here are much more qualified than I am, but I just hope to bring some perspective and engage in discussion, some honest discussion about the subject material at hand, inshallah. So I'll open up the floors if you're online too. Love to hear from you. And there's a bunch of people here in case you want to see, but a lot of folks here. Welcome you to come to Princeton once a month to join us. But Jazakallah khair. So the floor is yours, everyone. Assalamualaikum. Yes. Yes. Assalamualaikum. Kaise hain? Alhamdulillah.
Can you share some lines?
I'm going to have someone else do that because there's a lot of you and we're going to get into it. Dr. Saab, शुरुआत करें आप.
So maybe you can just give a quick introduction, Dr. Abdul Rahman.
No, please.
Dr. Abdul Rahman, mashallah, is an oncologist, but and he has many publications. He's also better known as Amir Rahman's father.
So because you asked a couple of lines, after the three were band, each band is 6 lines, but after that, the divine voice comes back. Jawab Shikwa starts. हम तो मायल बकरम हैं, कोई सायल ही नहीं, राह दिखलाएं किसे, राह रवे मंजिल ही नहीं, तरबियत आम तो है, जौहर काबिल ही नहीं, जिससे तामीर हो आदम की, ये वो गिल ही नहीं, कोई काबिल हो तो हम शान कई देते हैं, ढूंढने वाले को दुनिया भी नहीं देते. That is the preface of the response of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala overall. He says, हम तो मायल बकरम हैं, I am inclined to give, I'm inclined to be merciful. Mail is somebody that is actually finding an excuse to give. There is no one to ask for it. Sahil is the one who asks for something. Rah dikhlayenge kise, who should I show the path? Rah rave manzili nahi, nobody is walking on that path that I should tell him. Rah rao is a person who's walking, manzil who's going to a destination. Rah rave manzil hi nahi, towards this destination, nobody is really coming. Tarbiyat aam to hai. The education, training is free to get. Jauhar kabil hi nahi. Jauhar is the seed, kabil that has the ability to grow. A seed that can grow into a plant doesn't exist. Jisse tahmir o Adam ki, one who can build Adam. Ye wo gil hi nahi. This is not that dirt. That gil is dirt. So this is not the kind of dirt that can bring out a human being.
You don't even contain the essence.
Essence.
Yeah.
Koi kabil ho. If somebody is worthy, to hum shane kahi dete hain. Kahi was a king of old Persia. I can give you the emperor's excellence or his power if you are able. Dhoondne wale ko dunya bhi nahi dete. A seeker can get a new world for himself. I can give you a new universe if you are read a true seeker. So it's a simple little translation of where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's response starts. Jawab-e-Shikwa actually starts from here overall and then goes one by one each detail. So I am borrowing this from this book. I'm presenting it to you.
Oh, Jazakallah khair. So, there's something else that I was thinking about in regards to Shikwa, Jawab-e-Shikwa, which I think, we all can talk about. Shows, right? Everyone watches TV or movies and stuff like that. And there's certain TV shows and movies that will appeal to you. Now, were TV shows and movies the only way people communicated with art in the past? No, it's a generally modern phenomenon. But you have generally two types of shows that people talk about. You have descriptive shows, which just kind of present things as they are, and then prescriptive shows, which make you feel good or make you feel a certain way. So when we look at Shikwa and Jawab Shikwa, we're actually going to see that Shikwa itself is more descriptive. It's just showing it for what it is. Allama Iqbal is not sitting there and filtering his feelings. He's saying it as it is, right? And Jawab Shikwa is more prescriptive, right? It's more feel good. It's more feel good, which is fine, but he wanted people to feel the descriptiveness of their state. He wanted them to feel the shock of like, why would you say that? And he wanted them to become angry. He wanted them to become pessimistic to some degree, right? Against him, not pessimistic, in any other way, except that they realize like, what have we done? And why is this the state that we're in? It's a teaching method at the end of the day, and it engaged with him.
Grab this to their attention.
Yeah. Just got it.
And it's good to remember that it ends by saying, "Ki Muhammad se wafa tune to hum tere." Ye jahan cheez hai kya, lauh kalam tere. You can write your own destiny if you are loyal to my beloved prophet. So that was his message at the end. But along the way, mashallah, he gave a tremendous teaching of Islam. Yes. And its origin basically was when Ottoman Empire was going down, and Muslims were going down, being divided. Country was being, divided up into Western youth powers, and Islamic Ottoman Empire was basically into pieces. That was the background in which Iqbal got quite concerned and worried, and that motivated him to express himself the way he did.
Do you have more of these available for sale?
Lot of these.
Yeah.
Actually, I authored this book, by the way. Just show it up on top. Shikwa Jawab Shikwa. I transliterated it. I actually gave the English on open one page and see what it is.
Yeah, it's actually really nice.
Even you can read that. I'm on the other side. Even if you can't read Urdu, you can read that. And then gives the difficult meanings, and then simple English translation. And I brought this one for you, Imam, because you really love that. And I have plenty of these. I counted 23 people here, inshallah. If I knew that this was Shikwa today, I would have brought more of these. Yeah. But I wrote this when Amir was in school. He would come from Harvard every weekend, $99 per set of. Where is he? He's not living here. But anyway. And he would come there, tell me something about, and he would open up Kulliyat, any page, and I would translate it to him. And then 2009, when it was 100 years from Iqbal's Shikwa, I wrote an appeal to the Almighty. I said, 100 years have gone by. Where is the results? That appeal is included here.
Nice.
Okay, that was my Shikwa here. But this is Shikwa and Jawab Shikwa, and for him, for generation that cannot read Urdu, it explains everything in English, in Urdu. If you see one page,
this is very nice.
It just tells you on this side is English translation, then translation, then
you guys should see this. I don't know how you can get your hands on this, but you need to get your hands on it.
So this is basically, please keep it in.
This picture of you from last year is really nice.
That's why we'd like to get maybe 100 copies for us.
You got it.
There are, yeah, it's there.
Yes, I have these. I did not know that it's Shikwa's topic today, otherwise I would have brought it. And my home is away about an hour from here, otherwise I would go and get it.
So one of the questions I have is Iqbal and his poetry, are they taught to any level in Islamic schools?
Can I answer
so
that?
our children are studying the Iliad and Oedipus Rex and Shakespeare and Homer and in our Islamic schools.
Yes. When India divided into Pakistan and remaining India, Kashmir, where I come from, was in a crisis. Part of it, Kashmir wanted to be part wherever. I'm not going to go into politics, but Iqbal, being from Kashmir, was the main driving force for Kashmiris to really do something and get independence. So Iqbal was taught in schools, and even today in India, his first poem, which is written in Bangedara in schools, is Sare Jahan Se Acha Hindusta Hamara. That is still taught and recited by the students when they come in the morning. First thing they do is that, and we did that for years. And it was going on in Pakistan, at least from Kashmir also, for many, many years, 20, 30 years. That was the question you had.
Well, I
Is
was
it
asking
legal?
about schools here.
Yes, no, not here.
America.
Even there in Pakistan, they have it's no longer part of the syllabus, but it used to be. Our effort now, at least mine is to see to it that our grandchildren at least get some introduction about
Very
it.
important.
Yeah.
Imam Mendes, this is where you and Imam Nihal, when you give your durus, when you give your khutbahs, when you're talking to Masajid administration, not just it, right? There's Iqbal, there's Maulana Rum, there's
Saeed Nursi, like all these different people.
Bamba.
Yeah.
These are the people that our kids, they should study Shakespeare and Milton, but they should study
Also,
Iqbal and Rumi and this, right? So it's a generational thing that, as the brother said, but we need to bring that. Somebody needs to be, this is why think tanks are important. Muslims should say, okay, we're going to allocate a 2-year expenses for such and such scholar, come back with a curriculum that then Muslim schools
But
adopt.
Zija, if this something like this was available in every university, then you could tell the child. And at least get some introduction. We have to create that literature. We have to create that literature that is available in universities, colleges here, so that they have an option. My daughter, when she was in medical school in California, she took optional Urdu. And a lady was teaching her, and she told her Ghalib's ghazal, and she called me from there, Dad, what does this mean? I was pashema ka pashema hona. So I had to explain it to her. But I can see that auntie working hard to try to teach these students some Urdu optional for 6 weeks or 8 weeks. But there was nothing in syllabus for them to go get it from the library. We have to create that literature.
The place where I actually did see it happen was really interesting. When I was at Nadwa, amongst students, these like really poor kids who don't have anything to their names, they're the ones who are reading these like poems. They're the ones who are trying to understand it, but their like socioeconomic situations don't let them proceed with it. And it's really sad because I remember in Lucknow, Nadwatul Ulama was right next to the University of Lucknow. And like, again, in Lucknow, once upon a time, it was a land that was filled with Urdu poetry. And actually, before Urdu, many people don't know this, but before 1947, Persian was the main language of the country, right? And Urdu kind of followed behind. Now it's this like weird Hindi-Urdu combination where like Hindi is being forced on people.
In Pakistan?
In India today.
Hyderabad University was used to teach,
Yeah.
all Persian.
Persian was the language of the elite.
Exactly.
In other words, you went Hindi, Urdu in high school and college, but for master's and PhD, it was Persian.
Exactly.
So that's how my grandfather used to say, Awal Turki, Doyam Farsi, Soyam Urdu, or Bazat Hindi.
Exactly. That's for the elite.
But it's really interesting because in Lucknow today, like there were young guys and girls like my age that I met whose families have been there for hundreds of years. If you like, they don't know. So it's funny, the madrasas and all that, they're all focusing a lot of their literature on Urdu and Arabic, right? Which is necessary, but then most people in the city of Lucknow, which is known as this like capital of Urdu and whatnot, they don't know Urdu and they know English and Hindi. So I don't know, like, did the chicken, it's like a chicken egg situation, right? Did the chicken come first or did the egg come first? But people are losing out. And it's not just the language, it's the Muslim identity that's in the language that exists as well. Right, so it's systematically being done to make people forget their culture at the end of the day, and it was a very naturalized process. Urdu wasn't forced into anyone's like homes, right? Farsi wasn't forced into anyone's homes. So much so that actually familiar with, right, to some degree, no matter what, whether you're Sufi or Salafi or Brelvi or nothing, you're something. Everyone loves Shah Waliullah, right? And Shah Waliullah Dahlawi actually had translated the Quran into Persian, right? And it wasn't disseminated completely, but then his son Shah Abdul Aziz translated it into Urdu and disseminated it, and through that Urdu became accessible. So shortly after doing it in Urdu, they had not him specifically, but certain people in the late 1800s, early 1900s thought about producing a translation in Hindi, and they're like, "What's the point of that?" It's what it was the likeness of. Let's do a Latin translation of the Quran. Okay, there's money, you got to hire people. Is it worth it to make a Latin translation for the sense of accessibility? No, because at that time, Hindi was not an accessible language like that. that later occurred.
Can we open the floor to the
Yeah,
ladies?
question.
Yeah, please. I mean, everyone is
There are some
welcome.
scholars amongst the ladies as well. I'd like to open the floor. Maybe Khala, I know Imam Sohaib's mother is
Yes.
here. Amra. No? Okay. Maybe Khalu, Sohaib, Imam Sohaib's father.
Yeah, while we are waiting for a question from.
If not a comment, question at least, anything that you don't understand
Right.
from.
Khalid bhai, let him give the floor.
One, it's really not a question, a comment. Given all this discussion on Iqbal, it is very important that the new generation in this country, the way you use it, Dr. Abdurrahman, is not through introducing it at the college and university level. That's too late. Probably not very many
Yeah.
of them will be able to understand it. I think at the school level,
Yeah.
we need to. So Iqbal's poetry, especially very popular poetry like Labbe Aati Hai Dua
Yeah.
Ban Tamanna Meri, they need to be translated in good American English and sent to all the Islamic schools, weekend Islamic schools,
Yeah.
full-time Islamic schools, so that our children get to know Iqbal and his thoughts and really could benefit from it.
Yeah.
So that's really somebody like Dr. Abdurrahman can really do a great job.
It's done, just about done. It has to be now disseminated.
Yeah.
But I have been aware of this particular thing. In the individual homes, we should speak at least, even if they can't read it, they can hear it and they can understand the language. That's where it starts. And in Sunday schools, exactly like you mentioned, we have that. So we have to make that literature available.
So over here, what I'd like to propose, and Zach, our president, is here, some of our board members are here, is maybe we will actually formally institute like a Rumi Circle chair, and I would like to request Dr. Abdurrahman to head this,
I'll be more than happy to.
And I think also, yeah.
And make it formally. One of the things that Dr. Saab requested me is we start maybe a monthly magazine online as well as a hard copy magazine.
Yeah.
And
you have UPenn and you have like Princeton. We have the scholarship.
We have
Yeah.
We have scholarship.
Tremendous
We just need to
talent.
put pen to paper.
Yeah.
We gotta do it.
We gotta do it.
Yeah.
Zach, I think inshallah, let this be recorded that we have the Rumi Circle, the chair is Dr. Rahman, and we will start attempt maybe Zija, because my knowledge of this is very poor. My only role is here.
Wherever you are, wherever you are.
Yeah. Like I think what's more important, because there's a lot of like parts that are kind of like all over the place. Yeah. And there's actually a project right now that someone's working on, not on Iqbal, but on Ghazali. So they're like doing Ghazali for kids.
Yes.
So there's like
all 40 chapters of it.
Yeah. And like that's the thing. Like you know what they say, if you can complicate things, that's wonderful, good for you, right? But if you can simplify things, that's where the real challenge comes. How do you explain this to a 6-year-old? How do you convey the same idea? What was the term that was said? It was like IT folks take something simple and complicate it, right? And then physicians take something complicated and simplify it, right? So that's what we need to do. Actually, like even, have any of you seen Dr. Miraj Mohiuddin's Sira book, right? I actually spoke to him for hours upon hours, and he said it. He's like, my methods of learning in med school were that I had to, all this information that I had to work with, but I had to simplify it. So he took the same thing and did it for the Sira. So speaking to someone like that and having a mind like that can work to simplify things yet do justice to the concepts is the most important thing that we can do. Yes.
Yeah, but just, my question is for all the scholars here is I think it's an excellent idea for the Rahman and all mashallah, which I used to teach my kids too.
Yeah.
But I think it should be in the context of Quran, in conjunction with Quran.
Yeah.
Their verses. At whichever level, it can be a simpler level at a lower grade and a higher, more complicated and a higher grade, but it has to be in conjunction with them. Because the kids of this day and age, they don't have any time for anything else. If they find time, they go on video games and all that. So how we do that in practicality in reality, at the ground is the question. It's the thing we have to discuss. How we can do that, and it's not like that we decide today and then in 3 months everybody will follow. How we do it over a period of like another 5, 6, 10 years.
Exactly.
That we can change a little bit.
One note of caution. At experience in Pakistan and Kashmir tells me, whenever you bring religion into it, then so what you have to do is be very customized to the audience. For this audience, this is perfect situation. But for an audience that is not coming to the masjid, for that kind of people in schools and whatever,
Which is the majority.
which is the majority, you have to make it palatable for them. One reason Iqbal went a little bit less popular was because he became a Islamic poet. If he becomes universal poet or whatever, then they would accept him more. The same thing was going on with Rumi. However, the Westerns, when they translated and secularized it, then everybody bought his book. So you have to be tactful to convey the message, whatever it takes. If it takes in such a way that in chapter 10 you give the message of Islam, but in the first 9 chapters, 8 chapters, give a little bit of entertainment, give a little bit of attractiveness, give it a little of diction, and a little bit of education.
Let me rephrase my question. I agree with you. Is that understanding I think we need to know the basis from Quran to understand Islam. That was my question.
I realize that. However, that is not I'm talking about I'm talking about that. They also have to be listened to. So if you expect them to know a little bit about Quran, that's not going to happen. So the approach has to
that's
be,
a different problem. I agree.
Yeah.
The question of Zach.
Yeah.
Yes, I just want to give my comment. There has to be, I'm not as deep into Iqbal, but I'm more into what happened to the Islamic world post this months when Europe started coming out of the Dark Ages. And I read several books. There was one European writer who basically simply said it in one sentence. That after having read all these books as to what happened to Islam around 1600 when Europe was down and then what happened there. He said there are, and he was called, from his perspective, this is a white European guy, who wrote was that one India was the richest nation on earth, was a superpower, richer than what US is. He said at that point in time, what happened was the Muslims, for whatever reason, this guy maybe with the United Nations or whatever, where there are circumstances, but the fact is that while Europe was thinking of outside of themselves, when Newton was sitting under a tree and thinking of why the apple falls down and not up, people in the East were thinking about how do how do I manifest now, me, my own clan, my people. While the Europeans were thinking of all of us, Newton was not thinking of me making money from the apple falling. But what would happen in the moon if it happens? So he said there is the whole thought process that Islam became into themselves and selfish, while at least his version, I don't know if it's true or not, but to a certain degree, I think it is. That Europe was thinking of what is better for all of us. So that was it.
There's actually a really good book on this. Oh, also, I know there's a bunch of you listening online on Facebook as well. But if you have anything you'd like to add, feel free to do so. But to Dr. Mani, what you were mentioning, there's a really interesting book called, it's in Arabic originally, it was called Mada Khasir al-Alam, like what destroyed the world, but Maulana Abul Hasan Ali Nadwi wrote about it, and it was translated into English as Islam and the Muslim world, and like its destruction and like what led to it to be destroyed. It's available in English, and I think it's a very good read. It goes over succinctly all these different points. Obviously in history, it's never one specific thing, right? Like, for example, the erosion of American democracy didn't just happen because Donald Trump got elected to office, right? We all know we're alive at this time and we see what's happening. It's not just that. We know it's the wars. We know, for example, it's the poverty in this country. There's so many factors. The Holocaust didn't just happen overnight. There's a lead up to it. But I feel that book, Islam and the Muslim World by Abul Hasan Ali Nadwi, is a very good read in that arena.
Somebody's asking what's the name of the school. Can you just type it in?
Yeah. On Facebook or Zoom?
On Zoom.
Okay. So we're basically at our end. If there's anyone else that wants to, add, we can close off.
I think Zia's money, but the starting point has to be Quran. Everything was derived from Quran by Rumi, Allama Iqbal, or whatever you call it.
Like I think there's one point that I want to mention, if it's okay.
This is according to his servant who was very close to Iqbal, and he said that every time he wanted to write something, he would ask for his board, his pen, and his Quran.
Yeah.
So that's already there. I think. So if you want to make it a wider sense, let's not. And I would say that when you bring any country or any place that has got into a forced religion kind of a place, there has been deterioration after that.
Yeah.
And that is taken for granted. That's already there. So.
Hey, I think also to keep this in mind, look, we spoke about before being one-dimensional versus two-dimensional. The way you talk about Islam to your spouse and the way you talk about it with Bob at work are two different conversations.
Exactly.
And you want to understand the basis of those two conversations and build whatever literature you want on that. Yeah. Yes.
Hikmah.
Yeah, Dr.
One more comment. While we are discussing this, maybe the problem is this. Someone once said that if you give the same ingredients to 10 different foods and expect them to make a dish, all 10 will be different. So therefore, same Quran or a hadith that we give to 10 different people, depending on their biases, their interpretation may be a little different. So maybe it's the biases at the lower level we need to create, not just bombard them with information here, but somehow at the same time work at this level, at the lower level, but our own biases make us just mention about I like the red door or the silver colored door. That maybe that biases already have inherited biases from while we are growing up. So instead of, I know it's important that we talk, it has to start at the level of 7, 8, 9, or 10. So that one day when they are sitting here at our age, 40 years, whatever, they'll won't have those biases that many of us may have. Interpret certain things. I'll interpret in one way, somebody will interpret in this way, and therefore the explanation the end point is different. So maybe it has to be attacked not attacked, but taught at that level.
Say something.
6, 7, 8. Not at this level. There's this much you get to go up. At the age of 6, 7, 8, you get this much. That might be sense.
Very good, very good. At the age of 6, 7, 8, children are home. Earlier on, you do not have the power yet to set the syllabus. Optional that the children can take happens in colleges and high school. So this is why the first approach has to be where the kids can actually access it next year, and which we start in college.
Saturday schools.
Saturday school, yes, that we should be doing anyway. Even in Pakistan, where it's so easy to do, they have taken it out of the syllabus completely. So there is no Iqbal being taught anywhere. So you can imagine if the difficulty is there, Iqbaliyat people having difficulty keeping it in syllabus. Out of it will be for us here. Let's do what is practical. Sunday schools like this, create the literature, and people, your own children and their friends, they play with them. Expose them to, and then later on clubs or whatever else that you can create to disseminate the message. The idea is we are custodians of a certain kind of literature that has Islamic spirituality in it. It has to be accepted by people, and it doesn't have to be forced upon.
All right, inshallah. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out with some dua and, eat bagels and hang out or something. Everyone else, inshallah, who's joining online, feel free, if you're, join us next week, same time. We'll be right here on Zoom and on the Facebook page. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر آمين يا رب العالمين. جزاك الله خير.